Hello YouTube University students, and welcome back to Opa's Garage, where today we are working on the wife's 2006 Chevy Trail Blazer, and we are replacing the lower control arms and the lower control arm bushings. As you can tell, that one's used, which was taken off the driver's side. That one's new, which will be going on the passenger side. The reason that I'm making this video is I got online to do some research on changing these out, and all the videos that I found said that you have to take off the caliper, you have to take off the caliper mount, you have to take off the rotor, you've got to take out the axle half shaft. One guy even said you have to take this arm completely off, disconnect it from the lower ball joint, disconnect it from the upper ball joint. So anyway, I did the driver's side based on a theory that you can do all this work and save yourself maybe a couple of hours by not removing all that stuff. And so once I determined that yes, you can do it without removing all this stuff, I figured I would go ahead and make a video. So what we are going to need is, of course, a way to lift the vehicle. I like these little scissor jacks. I like to weld a couple of 3/4 inch nuts on the end of the jack, and then I can use my impact with my 3/4 socket to raise it up and down. When I'm working at home, of course, you got the hydraulic jack, and then you're going to need, well, you're not going to need a torque wrench as long as you trust your brute strength and know how many ugga-duggas you're putting on something before you actually do more damage than good. You will need a pry bar. The punch is one of those where, yeah, you might use it, you might not. I used it for lining up the bolts, lower control arm, lining it up to the bushing mount. You're going to need a flashlight for obvious reasons to see certain things. And you're not necessarily going to need a 3/4 inch ratchet, or 3/8 inch ratchet. You can tell I work on heavy equipment, 3/4 inch ratchet. But what you are going to need is this right here. This is a 7mm Allen head. And the reason that I emphasize that is most guys are going to have a set of Allens like this. And if you look real close, you'll see where it says 6, 8, 10. Oh, it skips right over the 7. And most of these kits, even though this is a Mac kit and they don't usually skip over nothing, doesn't have a 7mm. Whereas if you have a kit like this that uses a 3/8 inch ratchet, then you'll usually have your 7mm. But if not, you're going to want a 7mm. That's going to save you some headaches. Trust me on that one. You're going to want a 21mm wrench. You're going to want a BFH, which is a big frickin' hammer. You're going to need a pair of vice grips or a pair of pliers. Screwdrivers, just to take the little hubcap off when you're taking the wheels off. You can do all this with a regular ratchet, although you're probably going to be cussing yourself and wishing that you had, at the very least, a battery-powered impact or an air-powered impact is preferable. And then as far as sockets, 36mm deep well is going to take off that half shaft nut, or take it loose anyway. 24mm is to take off your lower ball joint nut, and then also the nut that holds your shock in place is 24mm. And then 22 or 21mm. The reason I say 22 is a possibility is because on the driver's side, my tie rod end was a 21mm nut. On the passenger side, I just discovered that it's a 22mm nut. So 21mm short, you're definitely going to need that, because that is going to take off. That's 21mm, that's 21mm, so that's going to take those off. And it seems like, oh, I know what else is 21mm. This is also 21mm, which is where your wrench is going to come in handy, because when you break that loose with an impact, that whole shaft is going to start spinning. The one thing that they did right is pretty much all these, if you look down the end of them, down the end of it, and even on the ball joint, you have a 7mm Allen head. So if that shaft starts spinning, you don't have to worry about getting the torch out. If that shaft starts spinning, you don't have to worry about getting the torch out. Put your 7mm Allen head in there, and then take your wrench, and you can take that nut off, no problem. And then we have a 19mm, or 19mm is also a 13/16, no, 3/4. 19mm is also 3/4 for taking your lug nuts off. And then I ordered my parts through Detroit Axle. Like I said, the pivot arm bolts, 21mm, 21mm. Well, on your pivot arm bolts for the Detroit Axle, that's 21mm. This head here. So you're also going to need a 18mm, and you're going to want your 18mm and your 21mm to be short, because you can get an impact in between these 2 points with a short socket on it. If you've got a long socket, then you're not going to get the socket in there with your impact, and you're going to be taking it off by hand, which is doable, but once again, we're working on trying to save time. Also, the 3 bolts, this is one of the bolts that goes through here, here, and here, that hold your bushing mount in place. This is also a 21mm. You can use a deep or a shallow for that, but I used a shallow 21mm on everything, and it worked out really, really good. The bolt on the back side, why they put the bolt in going in that direction is beyond me, because when you have to take that bolt out, you're going to have an issue with this boot right here. It's going to want to tear that boot. What I ended up doing was I stuck a piece of cardboard in between the bolt and the boot, and then I used a hammer and that punch to drive that bolt out, and I did not tear the boot on the other side. So that's one of the little tips and tricks that I have for this video. And then, like I said, the other one was that 7mm, because I watched a video where the guy couldn't get this off, ended up taking a torch, cutting it off, and then he had to replace this whole arm for the sway bar. Evidently he didn't realize that there was a 7mm Allen head in there that he could have utilized to not have to do that. So anyway, and then last but not least, you'll need a bag of rags, and I don't know what I did with my gloves, but I've got myself a pair of gloves to keep my hands as clean as possible, especially since I was working on something the other day. Sliced my thumb open really, really good, and I want to try to keep that as clean as possible. So got it all taped up, and then I use gloves to keep my hands clean. So at any rate, I will probably just do little video clips as I'm doing stuff. I'm not going to do a video that lasts 20 minutes, but it's fast forwarding through all the action for the most part. I'll probably just do little clips where I show you where this is how I did this, this is how I did that. Like I already took the castle nut off, flipped it upside down. I usually take the BFH, smack it there a couple times, give it a little tap on top, and usually that'll pop right out. Same with the lower ball joint. Usually I take the nut off, take the BFH, and put some up pressure on the bottom of the caliper, or the bottom of the rotor, and then give it a couple little love taps, and usually it'll just pop right off. So let's get started on this baby. Okay, we got the 36mm nut that holds your half shaft on loose, and smacked it a couple times with the old trusty hammer. Got it all loose to where it moves in and out. You don't really need to take it off because you're not taking the axle shaft out. Like I said, took the castle nut loose, and I wish I would have videotaped it, but I wasn't sure if it would come loose, and I didn't think about it. But smacked it a couple times there, gave it one good pop on the top of the head, and she dropped right down. Same thing with the ball joint. Got the ball joint loose. About 5 good solid smacks right there, and she popped right down. So you do not need a pickle fork. Yes, of course, I have pickle forks, but 9 times out of 10, a BFH and a few strategically placed blows with the BFH will get you the desired results. So let's continue. Okay, so I've got the tie rod end tied back out of the way. Got the little scissor jack set in place, and I got it raised up so that I can get the if you don't raise that up, then you can't get your impact in there in between everything with the socket on it. I took the one nut off, and then that bolt is actually stuck, so we can, this is so much fun trying to do with one hand while you're trying to line stuff up. No, you're not going to be able to get that. Anyway, you can get up in there, short 21 millimeter, and get it raised up. You can get up in there like that, and then you can go ahead and you can, well, back that off to that point, and then you're going to have to probably do some finagling to get that out. And then once you get that one out, then you can turn around and you can get that pivot arm bolt out. The one thing that I forgot to mention as far as tools, jack stands. Get yourself a set of decent jack stands. Please, please, please do not use cinder blocks. If you don't have jack stands, go to your local lumber yard or find somebody that's building a pole barn and get some 6x6 posts, cut-offs, or whatever. Cinder blocks collapse, whereas solid wood does not. Jack stands is your best bet. Even some cheap jack stands are better off than cinder blocks. But at any rate, I was just wanting to show you why it is that you really want to have the short 21 millimeter socket, so you can get up in there. If you had a deep well, then you would not be able to, obviously. Okay, another quick tip or hint or whatever. Once you get the nut off in there, well, that one's not all the way off, but you get that nut off and you get that nut off, then you want to lower your jack back down. When I had it jacked up, I was putting pressure on those two bolts, and that's why they didn't want to come out. As soon as I took the jack and lowered it down, I was able to just push that bolt right out and pull my impact out. So you got pressure on it if you got it raised up, but you got to raise it up to be able to get the impact in there. So something to remember. Okay, and we've come to the part that I was talking about earlier. Put the old impact on that baby right there. And she ain't coming loose at all. So take you a wrench, stick it on there, take you a 7 millimeter Allen head, stick it in there. Trying to do this one-handed once again, and voila, now she's coming off. So 7 millimeter Allen head. You probably don't have one, go buy one. It will save you from saying a lot of swear words in front of your children or grandchildren while you're doing this job. As you can see, the lower control arm is actually all loose and basically ready to come out. I'll see if I can get somebody out here to videotape as I actually pop all this stuff apart so that I can show you how to get the lower control arm. Basically, mainly the ball joint. Getting the ball joint out, it doesn't look like there's that much room in there, but you've got to pry the half shaft, the CV joint back out of the way. You've got to take those two bolts out. You've got to drop that part of the lower control arm down out of the way, and then pry the CV shaft out of the way, and then you can pop the ball joint out of its socket, and you don't have to take all this other crap loose like everybody else says you do. So, alright, we'll get back at it in here in just a second. Okay, so we've got the pivot arm bolts ready to come out. Something that you might want to remember is to leave the front pivot arm bolt in. I popped it out. I don't know why it is that I forgot that, but anyway, I shoved the punch in there. And then you got the rear pivot arm bolt, and you don't want to tear your rack and pinion steering boots, so get yourself oh, there it is. Get yourself a little piece of cardboard and just shove it in there where the head is. Take your hammer, smack it till it's flush, and then take you a punch and go ahead and drive it on out. And on the other side I didn't tear the boot, so I'm assuming that on this side I won't tear the boot. But once you get that off, then you can go ahead and lower the jack down, and you can go ahead and pull the lower control arms away from, or the lower control arm away from the bushing mount. So, and voila, the rear bolt is out, laying down there with a little piece of cardboard that sacrificed itself. And then the boot is not all torn to shreds, and so you don't have to worry about dust, dirt getting up into your power or your rack and pinion and ruining seals up in your rack and pinion. So that little trick, very helpful. Okay, next step is to take that scissor jack out of the way, and then we want to get the shock mount loose from the lower control arm. So we go back to our BFH, a couple little love taps right there on that arm, and that should come loose. Yeah, she's good and loose. Next thing you want to do is give this a little pull, and everything kind of comes loose. At that point you want to push your half shaft in, make sure that your half shaft is moving freely, because if you start pulling too much, you're liable to pull your CV joint inside that boot or inside this boot out. But as you can see, the lower arm is actually loose from there. Lower arm is loose from over here. And so now I'm going to take these two pieces of wood. I'm going to take this piece of wood and I'm going to shove it up in there, rest it up against the 3 bolts, and then let the spring rest up against that. You'll have to kind of pull the whole assembly out towards you to get this piece of wood in there. And then I take this little 1-inch piece of wood and shove it in between this arm right here and the spring to kind of support everything out, and make sure that you continue to push your half shaft in so that you're not trying to separate your CV joints inside the boot. And then at that point you should be able to take the attachment points from the lower control arm to the bushings and pull that down. So we'll be right back. Okay, so we got the lower control arm separated from the the bushings. Got your piece of wood back there to hold the shock out. Piece of wood back there to kind of hold this other arm out and out of the way. And I don't know, keep that on. You can see, but should be enough room to get that ball joint up out of there. So let's see if we can't, since I still don't have any camera help. I'll set that there. And so just take your ball joint up and out. As you can see, I still have the caliper on, still have the rotor on, all that other stuff that everybody says you got to take loose. You got to worry about your brake lines, your ABS lines, so forth and so on. And obviously you can do it without taking all that other stuff loose and taking all that other stuff off. So I'll go ahead and finish this video, even though, you know, the rest of it's pretty simple. But that's the main part of the video that I wanted to show everybody, is you can actually get that lower control arm out without taking all that extra stuff off. Okay, we got the lower control arm out from the car. If things look a little lighter and brighter, that's because today is actually tomorrow. Last night, wife said it's time to come in and eat, and so I wrapped it all up. So the next step is to get the bracket that holds your bushings in, and there's a bushing, there's a bushing. So of course right there, that bolt right there is going to be one of your bolts, and then there's that bushing. You go straight back, you got one, you got two. Of course I've already got them loosened up, so we'll pop those babies out. 21 millimeter. This is where you're going to be happy to have an impact. If you have to do this by hand, they can be in there pretty tight, and they can give you quite the business. And then got our trusty BFH and a nice good sized pry bar. I usually whack it a couple times, and then you'll stick your pry bar in there. Oh, wait a minute, there we go. It no. There we go. Anyway, a little bit of coercion and she comes right out, and then everything goes back together pretty much the opposite way that it all came apart. In the other videos I've seen guys saying you want to mark where that is so that you can put it back in the same spot so that you don't have to worry about an alignment. Trust me, you're going to want to get an alignment. As you can see, this was the driver's side tire of this vehicle, and you can see it got lots of tread on this side. No tread on this side. It's already gone through one set of cords, and it was actually getting into the nylon, so we're really lucky that tire didn't blow out driving down the highway at 60 miles an hour. So yeah, get yourself an alignment. It's money well spent. Tires will wear properly and the job will be done properly. Okay, so I've got the bushing bracket in, and one thing that you might want to do is leave the bolts on those loose until you get everything all reassembled. That way you can move that bracket around. Makes it a little bit easier to get everything lined up. And the next thing you want to do is pop the ball joint in. I put the nut on it. And I've got the little scissor jack ready to raise that assembly up, so I can take this block out right here, and that will give me enough access to put those up in there. And then I plan on, like I did from the other side, I plan on taking the bolts from the inside out, whereas that one went this way. It'll go this way this time, and then if anybody ever has to do this again, they don't have to deal with that boot, and you also don't have to deal with that boot when you're putting everything back together. So okay, a couple other little quick tips when you're sliding everything in. One of these little jacks is handy as heck. Even having a second person isn't as good as having this jack, because you can raise stuff up where you need it. But you're going to want to take your shock mount and put it in before you try to line those up, the bushings up. Slide that in, put a nut on it, and then I used my trusty little punch to line up the hole back there. And as you can see, well, I don't know if you can see it or not, but the bolt aimed this way, you're going to have plenty of clearance once I put that back, put the tie rod back on. So then the next thing is you just kind of move this thing into position, take your handy little punch, stick it in there, line it up, and then pop it out, take the bolt. Of course, I don't have it lined up perfect, so that's, oh, there we go. And then our trusty little BFH, give it a little love, and there you go. Okay, we got everything all buttoned up. That was 7mm Allen head with 21mm wrench, and got that tightened up. Those tightened up with the impact, impact, impact. As you can see, yep, there was more than enough room. I don't know why they put them in the other way from the factory, but this is the right way to do it. One other quick tip that I have for everybody, because I almost forgotten to put or tighten that nut up on the other side, and so one of the things that I like to do as I'm putting my sockets back on the rail is going over and making sure that I got everything tight. Oh, one of the other things is the 3 bolts underneath here. Once I got everything all assembled, then I went ahead and tightened up those 3 bolts. And like I said, I'm fortunate enough, I've got a car hauler. I'm going to load this thing up in the car hauler, and I'm going to take it to the tire shop, tell them to put 2 new tires on the front and give it an alignment. If you don't have a car hauler and you're going to have to haul it, or you're going to have to drive it to the shop, then I would suggest once you get it sitting on the ground, take a few measurements, make sure you're toe in, toe out. That's that front bolt there, you take it loose and that gives you some toe in, toe out. and then you're also caster and camber, I think, is affected by those 3 bolts. So it's quite complicated. I would recommend hauling it to the shop unless you're only like 2 miles down the road from the alignment shop or tire shop or whatever. But once again, as I was saying, on the other side, I almost forgot to tighten this nut up, and I knew I was doing this side, so I wasn't putting everything away. But as I was going over everything, I realized, oh yeah, my 36 millimeter, and I just picked it up in my hand, and I'm like, oh nope. And so as I'm putting my sockets away back on the rail, I usually kind of mentally in my mind go over, okay, what all did this socket need to tighten up, and did I tighten everything up with this socket? And I'll even get up underneath the car and double check, because the last thing you want is to take off down the road, especially if you've got to drive, you know, a significant number of miles or whatever, or if you take it to the tire shop and they do the alignment and they don't see that you've got a bolt that's still loose or whatever. You turn your wife loose in this vehicle, she's driving down the highway at 60 miles an hour, that nut comes off, that bolt comes out, and now she's laying upside down in the ditch, and you're going, oh wow, maybe I should have spent the $500 and let a shop do that. But which, by the way, this job, a buddy of mine works at a shop, and he said that to do the lower control arms and the bushings, which is what this job entails on both sides, is about between $500 and $600, not including the alignment. Including the alignment, it's close to $700. So it saves you a bit of money if you know how to do it yourself, but always make sure, check, double check every single nut and bolt that you take loose, that you got it tight. So that's going to end this video. If this was helpful to you, then please like and subscribe, and until then, keep living your best life and get out there and fix something. Later.